I am really, really interested in this new fad of canceling spring games. I think this is kind of crazy. I mean, I guess when it's explained to me, I sort of understand, but it's just another like moment where we show that college football is not at all about the fans, and that bothers me.
Yeah, before we dive into this, my hot take is that I don't know if it'll all go away by next year, but
Mhm.
it would surprise me if there are still spring games in 2027. Like, I think you'll see a lot more cancel next year, and then I think by 2027 they'll all go away. Now, I hope to be wrong about that. I would
Yeah.
love for this to get revisited, and it's like, you idiot, because I think they are. There are some benefits. I think we can talk about some ways that they could reimagine them and do some things differently than what they do. But I saw we on your Gator show, we've had Brooks Austin on,
Mhm.
covers UGA and then does a lot of national stuff too, the film guy. And he talked about how he thought this was more like less about tampering. Like, let's not pretend that every coach in America didn't recruit all these kids. Every coach in America hasn't
Sure.
already watched film on these
We didn't
kids,
need
or
to see the spring games to
right,
determine who
like,
we were tampering with.
yeah, exactly. And he says it's more about revenue. It's more like I would love to know what the
Mm.
cost of putting on a spring game is, but he talks about how you still have to hire all the security, you still have to hire all the stadium staff, you still have to hire all the concessions, right? And you have to do all that. What is the expense to put on a spring game? Not nearly the same expense as putting on a real game.
Sure.
Except maybe in some of these places like Nebraska and Tennessee, where they sell the Ohio State, where they sell these things out, right?
Well,
But
it depends on
there's
are
still
they
the
selling tickets for it though or not too, because packing your stadium for free, even with what their
correct. Yeah.
revenue generation on food is different. Like I know Florida's season tickets, I don't know what the case is for Florida State right now, but Florida's currently it's free. It was not always that way.
So Florida State charges like $5 a ticket, and it's more so just a way to take attendance. I don't really think they care because $5 times the 30,000 people that come, you're talking about a nominal amount, like what, 150 grand, but it costs more than that to put the event on. And
Yeah.
so, not, I mean, 150 grand, I'm certainly
Yeah,
cuts
but
into
if
that
you
cost.
pack it, if you're Nebraska and you have 90,000 people there, that's almost a $500,000. And then at $5 a ticket, right? That's $450,000. So that is a little bit different than the
That helps
150,000. That might defer some of the costs there.
for sure. So I, but I don't know like what is the true cost to put on a
Yeah.
spring game. That's
Yeah.
something both of us could find out pretty easily if we
Yeah.
would have asked. But um, I think if that number is 5 million to put
Mhm.
that, and
Right.
that's a crazy number. There's no way that it's that much. But if it's a couple million, if it's 1.5 million, then you kind of look at like, all right, we make 150 back on tickets, but it costs us 10 times that amount to run the event.
Right.
By the time you hire the local police department and security and stadium and
Yeah.
all that stuff, like it is a lot. All the people that work in the game behind the scenes, cleanup crews and everything else.
But
It
we've never been concerned about the cost of it before,
well,
right? And college
we
football has never been making more money than it is currently at this
I
moment.
Brooks talks about that specifically. The reason why is because of the revenue share. Like we've never had a $20 million line item that just got added to every single
Yeah.
budget in America or every budget in America of teams that want to compete for championships, right? Like I don't expect,
But why is it then the coaches that are the ones that are saying they're doing it and they're doing it for tampering purposes? Why hasn't the conference as a whole come out? Or why haven't individual athletic directors? Because honestly, if your athletic director came forward and said, hey, with this new cost sharing that's going to be taking place, it's hard for us to justify the cost. So unfortunately, we're doing away with this or whatever. Like at the very least, then you take it on the athletic director.
I,
This just falls on the coach at this moment.
So my take is, and we may disagree here, shocker. My take is that would be a worse look because what that athletic director is saying is, hey, I know that this spring game is 100% for the fans, the lifeblood of our organization that pays us and keeps the lights on. But because we have to pay more money and we're all having bloated salaries and our coaches making $10 million a year, we're going to take this away from the fans, right? So I think it's almost a better, now it's not morally better, but it's almost a better look to blame it on tampering or Steve Sarkisian blaming it on being tired, from all the games they played. I think it's it's a worse look to lie. And I'm not saying Matt Rule or Lincoln Riley or Steve Sarkisian are like, Florida State's is canceled too, but that's more of the renovation stuff that's going on in Doak. I think it's almost a better look to blame it on something else than for the AD to come out and say like, hey, this thing that is purely for you, you're starved for football because you haven't had it for 4 months. It's a nice break between the 8 months you don't have football. We're going to take that away instead of paying our coaches less money, instead of me taking less money, instead of us. I think that would go over like a lead balloon,
I mean,
like.
I personally, I think both should go over like a lead balloon.
Sure, I agree. I just think it's worse to tell the
there
fans.
are so many benefits to a spring game from the fan perspective, but also from the player perspective. And I look at, you're going to see a lot of guys in spring games that you aren't going to see in the fall, but they've put in the same amount of work the entire year as those guys you do see in the fall. And I do feel like sometimes the spring game is a little bit of a reward for them, right? Your time earned in the spring game many times is based solely on effort, not necessarily on performance. And coaches set it up that way on purpose. And, I'll give an example, not to throw my husband under the bus, but, Eric started every game at Florida for 4 years. Eric also, shockingly enough, was kind of an arrogant asshole, right? So hasn't changed still, and I'm married to him, so I must find this attractive in some capacity here.
Well,
but
opposites attract. He just kidding.
Every spring, whoever it was, whether it was Zook or whether it was Meyer, would name the backup as the starter every spring without fail, and it was always just like a little keep you on the edge of your seat, right? And so, Eric would punt for one team, the other guy would punt for the other. And honestly, in hindsight, was very mean to the backup who every year thought there was a legitimate chance that he might become the starter. And coaching was doing it as a mind thing for Eric. The person that ended up being, messed with mentally would have been the backup. But that happens across the country in every position, right? You want to push the young guys or the walk-ons or the seniors that haven't really been as impactful as you'd hope they would be. You want to push them with the guys who have been performing on the field. Like, there's an entire team dynamic that takes place with that. It is huge for the fans. It's a great way to break up the season. Florida used to tie when Meyer was there. They used to tie things to the spring game. And so it would be like, okay, the team that doesn't win has to do the landscaping on campus. And so there was literally a year where the next Sunday after the spring game, the team that lost had to show up and they were planting trees all over UF's campus. And Meyer had arranged it with the, groundskeeping crew of the university to make that happen so that it would hurt, right? So that you cared about this game. And those were the games that Florida was getting 75,000 people in their spring games. And I don't know. We're watching pieces of the sport that we love be chipped away at. And I think we can say it's just a spring game, or, it's just a rivalry that maybe was your fourth best rivalry, when we did realignment. It's just this, it's just that. But when you add all those little, it's just up, college football is changing in a drastic way, a million little chinks at a time. Yeah. And I don't love that.
So here's a couple of ideas, 2 ideas that I think schools could implement to do something with the spring, right? Like to give something back to the fans, because in large purposes, I know a lot of coaches hate the spring game too, because they do all these scrimmages like outside of it anyway. And sure. So, and they're more situational. Like, I'll tell you this, Florida State has not done a traditional spring game under Norvell. First year was 2020, so we didn't have them. And then since then, he's done, there's been, 11 on 11 football, but it's been a lot of situational stuff. Guys will start from the 30. Like, it's not really a game. The score ends up like usually stupid, like 12-4, because they do different scoring and stuff, whatever. He wants to use it more as a practice as opposed to an actual game. He wants to do situational stuff like a real practice would be, not, a performance for TV or whatever. I think you could do one of 2 things. I think one, you could merge kind of what Ole Miss does, which is kind of more of a pro. Now, Norvell would hate this because it's not anywhere. So this wouldn't be great for Florida State, but all college football should really do this. They should merge what Ole Miss and Florida do. And the Ole Miss side should be, it shouldn't even count as a practice. Like the NCAA, or once they lose power and we go to the autonomous four kind of controlling things, then we'll go with that. But it shouldn't even count as a practice. Like it shouldn't count against you. But you should do fun stuff like 7-on-7 and stuff that do a flag football game, get some old legends out there or some guys that have retired, whatever. Like make it kind of fun for the fans. I don't care, do like a pie eating contest. It doesn't, whatever you want to do. That's just kind of fun, interactive. And then you should work with your
TJ.
lose money. We talked about the revenue side of things, but if
TJ,
you could
pause. You paused for 20 seconds. Your face froze.
I
I
don't know.
hear anything.
What was the last thing you heard?
You said the second thing they should do.
Yeah, they should tie it in with their collective. And they should, Florida does a good job of this. Florida State's done it a couple of times with the Battle's End, but they should do the player signings and the idea of Fan Appreciation Day, move that back from when it used to be everybody had it in August, right? Move it way back to the spring.
Florida's still in August, shockingly enough. They still do it.
A lot of schools have done away with it because of the NIL stuff, like just whatever, right? Like the way that you have, guys are signing autographs for free or whatever. But do that with your collective and use it as a fundraising event, right? And so you may lose money on the spring game. Say it costs $250,000 to put the spring game on or the spring event that you do. But if you get that much committed, right, from people signing up for a monthly donation or whatever, you will make that back in the long term of your year, right? And so you'll lose money in April, but you'll make money the rest of the year. I think that would be a really good way to do it. Just kind of something that's more fun, something that's, the spring game is always typically a little bit more kid friendly than maybe a game is. And so it would be something that you could still bring your kids to. Your 5-year-old doesn't care if there's an actual scrimmage going on or if they're playing 7-on-7. Like they just want to be in the environment and see the players and get autographs and stuff like that. So like, I think that would be a good way to do it. Or if the cost really is the issue, you should still have you could still have the game or scrimmage or practice or whatever you're doing, and you could just televise. You could still just televise it, right? Like the actual money that you're bringing in. And I know that's not as good as bringing fans. Like there's something special about going to your stadium and being back up in that college town for the weekend or whatever. But you could still, at the very least, just televise these things, right? You could still say, hey, we're not going to invite fans up because of the cost, the things that are going on, but we're still going to put it on TV. And we have seen over the last 5 years, spring game attendance has waned since COVID for the very reason of, hey, I can just watch this on TV. Like used to be able to not watch spring games on TV. And now you're like, well, I can just watch it on TV and avoid it's a little closer for you, but avoid an 8-hour round trip to go watch a scrimmage. Like, yeah, I'll just watch it on ESPN Plus or whatever. So I think you could do one of those two things. They're very different ideas. And at least say like, hey man, we're not going to have you up to the stadium, but we are going to put it on TV. You can watch this thing. And I think either one of those would at least be some kind of a, hey, we're giving something back to you. We're going to do something for you. So they probably won't do either one of them, but those would be my ideas.
So, here's kind of an idea and also a take. So at Florida, and I don't know if this is the case everywhere, but this is my experience with Florida. Florida makes a really big deal in the spring game about bringing back their former players. So there are hundreds of former players that come. There's a huge tailgate that takes place beforehand. And I think that they would lose if that game goes away. That's the biggest event that they do for former players, and they would have to figure out a way moving that. But I do think that those are important lifebloods of the program as well, as keeping those former players happy. Florida did used to do a flag football game of former players prior to the game starting. I think that's an interesting point that you brought up. The other thing UF did years ago, when Meyer was there, is they did an event called Charity Challenge, and they did it at the end of the summer. But you could, it was in July, right before two-a-days, but you could do it for the spring game. And essentially, during the spring, your team is split into mini teams, which is exactly what happens over the summer as well, right? And you are kind of competing against each other. They would keep track of points, and this happened for weeks, right, within the locker room. But these same teams would go out on Charity Challenge night. They do it Friday night. It was under the lights. It was very cool. They'd all have a shirt on representing whatever charity they were representing, and they would do stuff on the field skills wise, like you were kind of talking about, like Ole Miss, tire flips, shuttle race. They even would throw like a dizzy bat in there, but skills competitions, pull-ups, push-ups, hangs, like just things like that. And they would add up, and then there would be a winner. And that winner basically one for their charity, and then the entire team would do something for that charity, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, and they would then go build a house, or they would whatever. But you could tie it in like you're talking about with the collective, and maybe even the collective makes a donation to that, or the team just physically does some sort of charity work for that event. They would give each of the charities tickets, and that way they could, and it was free to get in anyway, but it was more ceremonial than anything else. Like, this section belongs to, whatever, this charity. There's something you could tie in, but I do think limiting opportunities for fans to get to know players is a is a negative, right? It hurts college football. It's a problem. Your fans become super fans when they feel like they know the players that they're rooting for. That's already a problem these days because of the transfer portal. But when you limit opportunities for fans to really engage with players in person, I think you hurt it even more.
Yeah. What about this? Okay, this is crazy. And people have talked about doing something like this at all times, and they would never do this in a full-on capacity because of injuries and things like that, and maybe tempers and everything else. What if schools partnered up with their rivals and did this? Like, what if Florida and Florida State did exactly what you just talked about?
Yeah.
And it wasn't a full-on game, right? Like we will be protective of injuries and things like that. But what if you had like a 7-on-7, Florida and Florida State? What if you had like a jump, like the DB covers a wide receiver and it's just a one-on-one and you've got a guy throwing a jump ball like that? Could you imagine? And if you alternated the stadiums, right? You just went back and forth every year, the stadiums would sell out. Like it wouldn't be like 30, 40,000 people there at each game. It would be whatever the capacity, right? 75, 85,000 people. So yeah, that would be. Now again, and you could use as a fundraiser. Hey, the loser of this is going to have to give $50,000 to whatever charity, right? And then we sell the tickets. And if you buy a Gator ticket, it goes to Florida Victorious. If you buy a Seminole ticket, it goes to the Battle's End. That would blow out of the water. Like, could you imagine getting to go watch Florida State in the spring, even though it wasn't a real game, even though the one-on-ones, our wide receiver on your DB, like.
So why don't you let them know?
Try our best, but nobody, the big problem is, and you mentioned this too, the big problem is the people that run this sport don't actually care about this sport. And so like we're trying to think of ways to give back to the fans, do things for the fans, do things we as fans would want to see. Right. The people that run the sport don't actually care. And so, yeah, we're coming up with ideas that nobody's going to do because they don't actually care about football or the fans.
Well, if y'all want people that care about football, TJ and I happen to have some free time and we would be willing to run this sport.
Yeah. Sign us up. Of course.